Hey, buenas noches. Hello, everybody. Um, you can see I'm by myself, so not sure if my guest tonight is still gonna make it or if something happened. I don't know. We'll give her a few minutes to see if she pops in. Thank y'all for your patience and hanging tight while we get this sorted. Um, in case you have not heard, I am doing a no spin slash low spin challenge that starts on August 16th and will run to September 16th. So if you out here spending money like you moving bricks for El Chapo, like, it's just swipe, swipe, swipe. You need to push a reset on your spending. I invite you to join me and doing this challenge for a month. Now, it doesn't start until August 16th because my granddaughter will be visiting starting August 1st. And so I don't know how I can how I can be on a no spend while she's here. So as soon as she's gone, Dee Dee's got to get things together and bring her spending under control. Okay, so our guest is here, and so we'll get started. Um, in case you are new here and you're like, who is this lady? What is going on? Let me introduce myself. My name is Adelia Aborshade, although pretty much everybody on the internet knows me as Picky Girl Travels the World because that's who I am. That's what I do. I also help Black women become financially confident so that they can use their money in a way to live life on their terms. And maybe that means moving out of the United States. Maybe that means traveling the world, or maybe that means starting a goat yoga studio. I don't know, but I want to help you do that. So, um, on this channel, we talk about kind of all of those things, not goat yoga specifically, but we talk about living life on your terms. We talk about travel, particularly solo travel, and we also talk about living abroad and money. So if any of those topics are of interest to you, you are in the right place and you should subscribe. The YouTube analytics told me the other day that folks are not subscribing to this channel in the same numbers that they were before. So if the algorithm has been serving you my videos and you like them, you should subscribe. And then you would get turn on notifications and you would find out when I go live, when I post a new video, and so yeah, do that, do that. Okay. So, tonight I am joined by my guest, Donna.
Hello.
And hey, so glad you could make it.
I'm sorry that I was tardy. I had a little bit of a technical issue, but I'm here now.
Hey, it happens to me more often than I would like. So we understand that. We understand that. Funny thing is that it was a video I did a month or two ago. Y'all know time time means nothing. Time is an illusion. So I can't tell you when I did this video, but I did a video about different ways that you could move abroad if you didn't have a whole lot of money. And these were, and I highlighted programs, and some of them were country specific that invited people to come and work in their country. And if you didn't see that video, but you're curious, it is linked in the description of this video. Donna watched that video and reached out to me and was like, "Hey, I participated in that program and I also worked there under different circumstances. I'd love to talk to your audience about it." And I was like, "Great, come on down." And so here we are.
Awesome. Well, hello everybody. My name is Donna Carter. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and currently that's where I reside. I have been here since 2022, 2002, no, wait, 2020. I moved back from Korea after being there for my third time. Currently, I work at a grocery store. I'm a buyer. I buy at a grocery store. Um, let's see, what else? Where should I go with there? Where do you want me to go with that?
Well, I always kind of like to start at the beginning and set the stage. And so you were in Korea basically from about 2010 to 2020,
Yeah, yeah,
2020.
yeah.
Okay. So let's back up a little bit and talk about the how and the why you ended up going to Korea in the first place.
Okay. Well, the why, I've always been really curious. I was always very interested in going different places. I've always wanted to like take myself out of here because I thought, oh, there's a huge world out there. There's so many places that you could go, people that you could see. I wanted to immerse myself into a different culture, learn about someplace else, learn a different language, try different foods. And so at the time I was going to university, and I had a professor who I talked to, and she looked at me one day and she knew that I had experience with children. And she also was like, well, you love children and you're doing theater. I have a friend who's teaching in South Korea. Maybe that's something that you should think of. So I that kind of got the wheels turning for me. And then I went and I finished school. And then there were some years where it was like about maybe 4 or 5 years later when I decided that I wanted to shake up my life and do something different because I felt like I was sort of stuck in a rut. Like just kind of working a lot of retail jobs, working a lot of jobs where I was working in coffee shops. And I'm like, I have this degree now, and what am I doing with it? So I went back to school. I went to Hamlin University, which is in St. Paul here, and I got my TEFL certificate, which is Teach English as a Foreign Language certificate. So basically, once you get that, you can go. A lot of places will like, oh, you have this. That's great. That's more experience. You've gone this training. After I graduated and got my TEFL, I started doing the research about places that I wanted to go, and I remembered South Korea. At the time, I was also looking at Japan, and I was looking at like Vietnam and Thailand. Those were all the places in China, were like the big places that I looked at. And I thought, okay, well, I'll start doing research. I went to this website called Dave's ESL, which still exists. You can get a lot of information.
Dave's website, that's like the OG website.
It is, yeah. Um, Sorry, I'm so hot and sweaty right now.
No worry.
First, I'm not sure where to look. I'm like, do I look up here? Do I look down here? But at any rate, so I started doing my research and I started looking at schools, the countries, and through Dave's, there's like so much information that you're kind of, going through. But I started talking to other people who had this experience. I'm like, so I don't know really where to go, like what to look for. And they're like, okay, these are some of your options. Like when you go in, you can look for teaching in public school or teaching in private, which are two of the biggest things that people do when they're teaching abroad, especially when it comes to teaching in South Korea. So I started looking, and I'm like, I haven't done this before. So I looked, and I actually went through a recruiter. And the recruiter that I went through was this recruiter called Canadian Connections.
Mhm.
And what was appealing for me about them was that the person who owns this thing, or who owns this service, he actually was a teacher, and he knew all the things that you would need to get you from point A to point B to point Z. And I needed someone to hold my hand because I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. So what I did was I applied. I had an interview. He said the school really liked you, and then from there on, he just took me through the process of getting all the paperwork that I needed. And there was a ton of paperwork that you need to get yourself to Korea. So I went through step by step and got all that stuff together. And then I landed in South Korea in 2010.
Okay. Now, you mentioned Korea, Japan,
Yeah.
China.
Yeah.
Now, were you considering those countries because, your professor had kind of planted this seed about South Korea, or were you considering other places as well?
I was open. I mean, I considered other places as well. But something about Korea really stuck out for me. And I guess based on what I found through Dave's ESL and like researching other areas, Korea had the best stuff to offer. Like they were paying the highest rate going in, and they had their benefits were better. Um, and it was
Mhm.
like I felt like they were. I also too felt like they were more. They would take care of you more, so it was like, you have this system, people are gonna, help you through it. They've got these different programs. EPIK is the one that you brought up, and I did go through EPIK. Not initially, but I went through EPIK, my last public school that I taught through. And it's funny, but I do have a bag that I got. I'll show you that epic little thing. But there are two other programs. In my case, I went through Jeollanam-do, which is a province in South Korea. They had their own special language program, and it's basically, I'm going to say it's basically kind of an offshoot of EPIK. Different areas and provinces have their own kind of program, and basically all the training is epic. Because once
I
you get to it, then they make you go through an orientation. And I've been through so many orientations. Like I was like, oh my god, another one. I've been here 3 times. I know this stuff. I'm not new to Korea anymore.
I
I don't know if I answered your question. I feel like I kind of like
Yeah,
sort of talked
I
around.
think so. I think so. I feel like that part of the world at that time was, and this may be my limited exposure. I feel like that part of the world that was very much a drive to get people learning English,
Yeah,
maybe more so than other places. And so a lot during that time period, when you heard people saying, "Oh, I'm going to teach English abroad,"
yeah.
primarily they were going to somewhere in Asia.
Yeah. Yeah, Korea was definitely, I would say, the number one spot. Japan was up there too, but I would say Korea, China, Japan, and then it would be like Vietnam and like Thailand. So those were
Yeah.
like that was the cluster, and just everything. I kept seeing lots of job offers from Korea. They really wanted you to come there. And then my experience was once I was in Korea that people really want to learn English. There was always opportunities to practice with folks, children, adults. I taught third through sixth grade primarily, but I also was in my case I ended up in a small fish farm town, and so what happened was,
That does
they
not
would
sound
have
fun.
me it I was at first I was like, I'm not okay, I'll deal with this. It'll be fine. You've never been to Korea. This is exciting. Everything was new. I'm actually glad that I did have that experience because I got to see Korea in a totally different way than some of my other friends who ended up in the big cities, like who ended up in Seoul or Busan or Incheon. I got to have regular interactions with farmers, with older Korean women who would like sell like their goods out on the streets, in addition to my students. And I'm grateful for that because I got to see like regular people. Like the province that I was in is called Jeollanam-do, which is really, really far south, and it's closer to China. And that area is like one of the least developed areas. Like I remember walking through like rice fields. So it was like very country, a lot of open space. And it was beautiful. I mean, there was mountains everywhere. My apartment I overlooked, and I saw there was this huge Buddha, and I would get to see that every morning. So that was really beautiful. I was glad that I got to have that experience and that introduction to Korea.
Now, this your first time that you went over, that
Yeah.
was that in this province?
Yeah, the first time,
Okay,
through Canadian connections, I ended up in Jeollanam-do, and
okay.
so that whole province, we all trained together, had our orientation, and they sent us off to all our different respective schools, which were all in that particular province.
Okay, so I taught abroad, but I
Mm.
was a certified teacher in the States, and primarily I taught at international schools and schools that call themselves international schools, and so that
Yeah.
is a different that is a
Yeah,
different experience.
yeah.
Um,
Mm.
and so I want to dig a little bit into um, what it was like. So you worked with a recruiter. It is possible to find a job without one, but
Yeah,
would you
yeah.
say that there were benefits for working with a recruiter?
Yeah, definitely. The For me, the biggest benefit was like having somebody who will help you with paperwork and getting you. Like the biggest thing that Shane did was getting me my information and then sending it off. Like I sent it to him, and then he collected all of my information. He sent it off to Korea. And in his case, I believe that he actually spoke Korean too. So he was able to communicate back and forth with them. So that was one less step that I had to do. I just sent all my stuff to him and then he sent it. So I was able to check off the list. I felt like more secure and protected having a recruiter because if there was any questions or concerns, I could go to him and ask him questions, especially if I didn't feel like I was getting the answers that I needed through my co-teacher or at my
Uh-huh.
school. I could go, okay, I'm going to go and talk to Shane or somebody from that, and they can maybe help me with with any kind of questions that I might have.
Now, did you have to pay for the recruiting service?
No, no, that's
Okay.
one thing that people, when they start their journey, is there are folks that will say you need to pay. Like even now, recently, I was curious, so I was looking, and there are a lot of like tricky services where they're like, oh, we'll get you these jobs, and then it turns out it's like for some TEFL or TELSL kind of online course, and I'm like, no, I already have that. I just want to get the job. I don't need to go. So they're like, "Oh, you pay this, and then we'll place you." And I'm like, "No, I'm good." So there is stuff like that, but generally speaking, if they ask you for that, it's a total scam. And
Okay.
through JCSL, none of the places are asking me for money, and so I knew that this is legit. I mean, they're just asking me for the things that they need, like your resume, or in this case, because you're coming from another country, your CV, so they can see like everything you've done. um,
And that's what I would expect
yeah,
for, English teaching. It's
yeah,
kind of a mix
mhm,
in, K just, like, teaching specific subjects. It's kind of a mix. There are services that you pay for, and
yeah,
in theory, they are supposed to have better schools to search from.
mhm,
Um, but generally, the school or the country somebody's paying the recruiter, so if you're trying to teach, English somewhere, you really shouldn't have to. Now, um, can we talk a little bit about so the recruiter helped you make the connection and helped you find this position.
mhm.
That was through a program sponsored by this province.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what kinds of benefits or extras did they get? Did they cover flights? Did they cover visas? Was your apartment included? Like those kinds of things.
Yeah. Through all this stuff, I mean, generally speaking, because well, I worked for three public schools. So signing a contract with the public schools, you pay for your flight up front, but you are reimbursed for your flight within the first 2 months of your contract. So immediately, you get sent to your school. You have an apartment. So your apartment is there. Sometimes it's furnished, sometimes it isn't. my first situation, they totally furnished my whole apartment. I had like tons of blankets and it was crazy. I mean, like they really set me up. So that, and then they also give you $300,000, $300,000 won, 300 won. I'm sorry, 300 won, which is probably about 300, maybe 300, 350 US dollars to buy little extra things that you need for your apartment, like, cutlery,
Kind of like a
glasses, plates.
settling in
Yeah,
allowance.
it's a settling allowance. So you get the apartment, the plane fare you pay for, but they reimburse you for that. Um, I'm trying to think what else. In the beginning too, they will, a lot of times you have to sign a deposit for your apartment. So in my case, it was 500. So 250 they took out 1 month, and they took out 250 the next month. But you get that at the end if you leave, well, whenever you leave. So if you leave
Mhm.
after the contract, which in Korea, when you sign it, it's 1 year. Um, and a lot of times you'll have the option to re-sign if the school likes you and if they think you're doing a great job. And in my case, every time they asked me if I wanted to re-sign my contract. I only knew of one person in my program who they didn't ask her back. And it was one of those things where we're all like, oh, sorry, you know. But anyway, so yeah, so they do that, and then you get paid. You get paid every month. And I was just talking to a friend of mine who's actually still in South Korea. She's actually on her way out. She's been in Korea for like 9 years. In Asia, she's been altogether 15 years. So she was in Japan before, and she was a part of the JET program that you were talking about as well. But anyway, I was asking her, I said, oh, I just want to refresh my memory. Like, how many vacation days did we get? And in the beginning, we got 18 paid vacation days. And then after a year, they gave us more. So they added like 5 extra days. So it's 23. And right now, currently, it's 26 paid vacation days that they have. And I'm like,
Okay.
26 days, like since I've been back here, I think I've had like maybe five.
Well,
Um, in like
when
3 years.
I lived in China, I didn't understand this about the Chinese. I worked at a Canadian offshore school that was housed on the campus of a public Chinese school. So we got Chinese holidays.
Oh,
And they were
yeah.
like, you got 10 holidays. But that's a lie because you have to make up holidays.
Oh, oh,
So, yeah, we'll give you next Monday off, but you got to work this Saturday. It was that
oh,
kind of thing. So,
no.
hearing that, I'm like, what?
No, no.
But yeah,
That,
you live and you learn, but that kind of
yeah.
sucked.
That's like sneaky. um,
Well, and I would be so irate about it because they'd be talking about the vacation, and I was like, "This is not a vacation day. I
no.
still have to come to work."
Yeah. No.
It's
Well, that's
so bizarre.
crazy. That's really
That is
crazy. In Korea, we got the same vacation days off that our Korean co-teachers got. Um, and one thing too about them, I don't know about China, but in Korea, the school year starts in March, and they have a
no,
couple different
no.
time periods. So when I started, there were a couple different start times. Like there were people that came in before me who started in March, but then they had to come to the orientation. I was one of the late starters, so I started in April. And then there was a couple that started even earlier than us that started in like February. But typically it's usually March or April. So right away, like that whole, I don't know, a couple weeks that you're there, because it's like the end of April, then already they have holidays. They have like Children's Day, they have like all these, and you're like, oh, we just started and I already have to go and be away from school.
Yeah, that is
It kind of shook
that
me
is
up a
not
little bit.
how the Chinese get down. Um, if you don't want to answer this question, that's cool.
Okay.
But can you talk about how much this paid?
Um,
Like
well,
that first gig that you got?
well, starting out, I actually have my contracts here.
Oh,
I've
wow.
been around. This isn't actually my first one. This is my second year contract. So But that one, let's see, I made 200 two let's say 2.3 million won, which is roughly about like 1900 or nine yeah $1900 a month. But the thing is, though, when you're getting that, you're not paying for your apartment, which is a really big deal. I mean, that's a huge deal. Um, and it was enough for me to save money. Like I was able to pay off a credit card. So,
And I
and
think I think that's an important point to make because when I made that video, because it was I made that video in response to folks who were like, well, I don't have like this savings that I can take to then fund my life abroad.
yeah,
And having somebody else pay to move you abroad, that's the way to go.
yeah,
Now, and I've said this multiple times,
mhm,
a lot of folks have in their mind, I need to make the kind of money I was making in the US. And that is typically not the case.
mhm,
Um, and you said it, how much you could save. So that's really if somebody is watching this and you're considering taking a position in another country and you looking at the salary numbers and you're like, I don't know if this how good this is. One of the questions to ask people is what is the savings potential there? Like what percentage of your salary can you save?
yeah,
Because that's going to give you a much greater insight than simply this is how much people are making, I think.
mhm, yeah. It also too depends on like your lifestyle. Like that's one thing that I will say in orientation is they talk about everything about like lesson planning and you adjusting to new culture. And one of the things they talk about is also too like how you spend your money, because there are a lot of young folks that would come there. I mean, different ages, but primarily young people. And then they're like, "Oh, this is a vacation." It's like, no, you're actually this is work. They hired you,
Yeah.
and it's a job. It's like 40 hours a week. You do get your paid vacation, and you get the vacation days off that your Korean co-teachers get. Um, but you also do have to go in at times when like the vacation. Not what I'm trying to say. Summer vacation time doesn't really um, match
Match
up.
up
Yeah, like
with
when you're
what they
talking
do in
about
the
like
US.
where it's like, okay, they're on vacation and then you have to go to school. And we have this something, we would call it desk warming. So you go to school, and there were many times where I would have to go when my co-teacher was gone and just show up. And they're like, you can lesson plan. I'm like, I don't have to lesson plan for 3 months. Like I would do it. I would go to school, and I clean the heck out of my classroom. I would do new boards. I would make materials. I and also too, there are some times where you can plan other things. I had friends who are planning their trips, places. So as
Well,
long as you're there, you're physically, your body's there, then that's what they care about. That you show up and you're ready to work.
and something else to consider, and Korea, I think, is not unique, but not all countries do this. A lot of people I've heard who go to teach in Korea, part of their package, they pay into the Korean retirement system.
Yeah.
And when you leave, you can get that money out. But something to keep in mind, like you said, like young folks coming and thinking, like, oh, this is a vacation. But while you're working there, if the plan is to come back to the US, you are not contributing to Social Security.
Yeah.
So it's a very smart move to be doing something on your own in terms of retirement or financial independence, especially if you're not going to be in that country forever. You're going to be somewhere else. You really need to be
Yeah.
looking out for that yourself.
Mhm. Yeah, you are paying into the pension, and every time you leave, you cash out. And the limit in Korea is 3 times that you can come back and forth. I know many people who stay forever. I have several friends who have been in Korea for a really long time. Like I have another friend, he's been in Korea even longer than my one friend who's going to be leaving soon. and he's made it his home. He's staying.
Okay. So, one of the things we wanted to talk about was the different kinds of schools and situations you taught in, because one of the things that I mentioned in the video I did about, like, if you don't have a lot of money, how you can still move abroad, is that going through something like EPIK in Korea or JET in Japan
Mm.
might be a better option than going to, like, a language center in China, because all
Language.
schools are not created equal.
um, yeah, that is true. That's actually one thing people do warn you about in Korea is the difference between working in a public school situation, or working in a university in comparison to working in a language school. In Korea, their term is hagwon. They call it a hagwon. It's Hagwon. And they have all kinds of fancy names to make it like it's not hagwon. So let's say, like you say, language school, institute. In my case, international school. Um,
Got
and
to
I
be
ended
careful
up,
about that one,
yeah,
because folks throw that terminology around,
yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things where I got there and at the school that I taught at, the last school, which is, yeah. Anyway, but I realized very quickly that, oh, these people don't know what they're doing. And they looked at me crazy when I was talking to them about curriculum and like where they wanted the kids to be, and what's the goal, and they just blank. And I'm like, oh, and they're like, you can do whatever you want, which is basically what they said to myself and the other teachers. And then we all eventually just got together and said, look, we're going to design the curriculum. So everything they have there now is all stuff that myself and a bunch of other teachers did, all of our lesson plans, everything. Um, but it was one of those things where it was just the difference between that and being in public school is just night and day. I mean, I felt really protected in public school. I mean, sure, there are pros and cons to both situations, but mostly I would say public school way more pros than cons. Um, in this situation, I worked like 80 hours a week, which is not an exaggeration. And people are like, really? I'm like, no, I was at school. Uh, in addition to teaching and doing the lesson planning, I had to write a biweekly newsletter to parents, take pictures of the kids. And I also had to write report cards of these kids every week. And I was teaching kindergarten students. So I was doing that, and I had a Korean co-teacher, and they also told me that I had to do after-school classes while I was doing my writing out my lessons, like while I was like
mhm.
doing organizing everything for the next week. They're like, "Oh, you need to do this, this, and this," and I'm like, "Oh no, I'm not doing that. I don't have time. When do I have time to do this?" And they're like, "Oh," and so I would take home my work with me, and I worked all weekend, and that was the breaking point where I was like, "I have to get out here."
Yeah, nobody as somebody who taught in the US, nobody goes abroad to
You know?
do as much or more work than they did
Yeah, it was
back home. Now, the conditions are different in a public school versus a Hagwon.
yeah, yeah.
Where was there a difference in the pay as well?
Yeah, yeah, it was. I mean, I'd say the pay that I was making was probably about the same as the public the public school, only because they started me out like initially they wanted to pay me less, and I said, "Oh no, I have experience." I said, "You can't do that." I'm like, I said, "God, why would I leave a job, public school job, and for this job and make less money?" That I said that doesn't really make sense to me. And so the guy who was my recruiter, or the person I was working with through the school, he wasn't really a recruiter, he was a representative for the school. He got them to up the pay for me.
Okay. All right. And so ultimately, well, before we go there, let's talk a little bit about your experience living in Korea,
Okay.
small town, bigger city, as a
Mhm.
Black woman, because I started this comment, and I think most of us have heard some derivation of this in some way or another.
Right.
So talk about like what was your experience being there,
Like,
looking like you?
um, honestly, well, in the small town that I lived in, people were really very curious. I mean, I did have like my first day of orientation. I was walking down the street with a friend of mine. She's from Canada. She's a white woman, and a Korean woman who was shorter than me came up to me and she like squeezed my breast. So I was like, I didn't know what to. So that happened. But it was only because, it was one of those things where I'm like, well, weird stuff like this happens. It was my first experience having something like that happen. And I'm like, okay, well, this is a memory. You'll remember this experience. It happened. I would get people do look and they stare, which is something that's very common in Korea. They will look and stare at you. Because you are different. Sometimes I knew other people had people actually taking pictures of them secretly. And I was like, well, they've never seen a Black person in this way or whatever, you know. Um, I just at a certain point I was like, well, I'm here and I'm here to teach and to have this experience. And you're gonna have people that are weird no matter where you go, and who are, but then I also had experiences with people that were really incredible and wonderful, and they were just very curious. Like folks coming up to me, like I developed a really close relationship with the people that worked at this bank that I banked at. It was in my town because it was so small. The bank and the post office were in the same building. So I set it up so then I would do my banking and I would send my stuff there. And they sent me like away with these wonderful gifts when I left. And one woman said to me, she was, "Oh, you have such a wonderful, kind, sweet heart." And I said that just like really touched me. And she goes, "Thank you for coming and teaching our kids." And I was like, whoa. So I felt like somebody saw that I made a difference. And just by me being myself and being a Black woman and showing these kids, because a lot of them had never seen a Black person before. And
In a
so,
rural fishing
yeah,
village, that does not surprise me.
yeah, yeah, one little kid who was terrified of being able to run. And then towards the end of it, he like smiled and he became comfortable around me. But it was because, he got used to me and he saw that, it wasn't scary, you know.
And I don't ask that question trying to elicit a particular response from you because your experience is your experience.
Right.
But,
Yeah.
we often, especially in the age of having like Instagram and YouTube and all of that,
Right.
we're getting to see what people's travel experiences or their experiences living in other cultures is often like. And I am wondering, Asia is kind of, when you're Black,
Yeah.
Asia can be an interesting place. And
Yeah.
if you're someplace where there is a large US military presence, I think there might be a little less like, oh my gosh, I've never seen a Black person. There's a little less of that.
Yeah.
But these are still, like colonialism,
Right.
colorism, like those are still things.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
so being a Black person, you can't be in those spaces and not have that impact you in some way. But
Oh,
it sounds like the impact was not such that the experience was detrimental.
oh, yeah. It wasn't. I mean, I definitely had other experiences that I, had to, like, oh, okay, this is happening and, go through it and figure out how I was going to deal with it, how I was going to feel about it. But yeah, what you said, I mean, Korea, there is a huge military, presence there. So either, and if people are looking at you as a Black person, they're thinking firstly that you're probably in the military. Um, and then you say, no, oh, you're a teacher. So it's not automatically the first thing, especially if you see a brown skin or black skin person. And typically, when they think English teacher from the U.S., they're thinking white, young white person. And then I show up,
Well,
but
and
and
let's
I'm
be
like, here
real,
I
that's most places,
am. Right.
because even here in Mexico,
Mhm.
folks say, "Where are you from?" And I say the United States, and there are quite a few people that kinda look like, "Hmm, not what I woulda guessed."
Yeah.
So, that's if somebody's watching this and they have not spent a significant time outside the United States, that's pretty
Yeah.
par for the course,
Oh yeah.
that
Yeah.
folks do not associate people who look like us
Mm-mm.
with America.
No, not at all. That was actually some of the lessons that I taught my students, about like, oh, different cultures and places and, different skin tones. And I said, well, where I'm from, we have all kinds of different types of people, and showing them, pictures and talking about different culture. And then we started talking about continents. And then, they talked about, oh, Africa. And I'm like, well, yeah, Africa is a continent. It's not, there are many countries in Africa. I say, where in Africa? Which country? And then I would show them and we'd, point. I said, just like Asia. I said, we live in Asia. Korea is in Asia. But Korea isn't not it's not the same as Japan or China. You have very different, distinct peoples, cultures. So
Um, Another thing that we often hear about Korea is how safe it is. Uh, was that your experience?
oh yeah, yeah. I felt so much safer. It's actually coming back here. I felt really scared coming back to my own hometown. Um, I mean, I'm from Minneapolis. I live right now. I live about 7 or 8 blocks away from George Floyd Square. Um, so, and I came back, in 2020, like right after that happened. And so the city, there's lots of burnt down buildings and a lot. And right now, there's a lot of young people going around stealing cars, and you know, see a lot of homeless stuff, just a lot of guns, and that's something I didn't
America's
think
the
about.
greatest place in the
I
world.
didn't think about those things at all when I was in Korea. People are like, "Oh, aren't you worried about like North Korea?" And I'm like, you know what? I mean, it's something I think about, but I don't think about it every day. I'm like, I'm with South Koreans, and they deal with it every day. I mean, they're still at war with North Korea, and they still live their lives and they're still doing their thing. And they occasionally, there was a couple times where there were things where they had to kind of get us ready. There's like one incident that happened where they're like, okay, are you registered, are you okay, are you do does your embassy know where you're at, because just in case we have to evacuate you for some reason. And that was, I think that was around 2011. Something happened with North Korea, I can't really remember, but I felt safe. I felt safe walking around at any time, whether it would be day, night. I didn't worry. Yeah.
And that is such a new concept. I'm like being a black woman in the United States and being able to say, "Oh no, I never had to worry about my safety." Like that
Yeah.
is a foreign thing. That is not the reality.
Mm-mm. Nope.
Okay. So you decided to go back to the US.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
let's dig into that a little bit. Was that always the plan, or had you hoped maybe to stay in Korea permanently, or maybe transition to another country?
Um. Well, I came back like 2 times, 3 times. I mean, I came back after after my first contract, not my first contract, after my first school, because I stayed for another year, so I was there for 2 years. Um, I'm sorry, let me go back to what you're saying. Um, I'm gonna go back. So I did actually think about staying longer. Um, but there was some point where I was like, I think I might want to go someplace else and see and a different culture. And also too, I wanted to figure out if there's another job that I could do where I would have more of my own personal time, more free time, and not have to work as much. Um, and then, here actually talking to my friend, I was like, "What? They have 26 days? What? 28 days? What?" I'm like, "Shoot, not everybody actually has 28 days, whether you're a beginning person or you've been there for a while." And I was like, "What? You used to have to earn that." But anyways, I'm sorry. I'm kind of going all over the place. But yeah, I did actually think about staying, and then I was like, you know what? I think I might want to go somewhere else. So I thought about like Vietnam, because I went with a friend of mine. We went and we visited Hanoi, and we went to Ho Chi Minh City. Didn't really care for Ho Chi Minh at all. But I liked Hanoi. But then I was also too thinking about money. Like they don't pay as much, but then again, too, the cost of living is
The
like
living is
lower than it
less.
is in Korea. So it's those things. So I that would be a place that if I was going to go back to Asia, I probably would think about going and trying to get a job in Vietnam. Also, Thailand was a place that a lot of people, would think about going to or would eventually move to after being in Korea, because they're like, oh, if you like the beach or you get, to hang out more. You don't get the pay isn't as good, but again, the cost of living is cheaper. So there's a lot of things to think of, but yeah, it's something that I occasionally lately I've been kind of thinking about, like, oh, maybe I should go back.
Okay.
Not
So when you came back in 2020,
yeah.
was that due to the school situation? Was that a pandemic kind of situation? Or was that just, I think I'm done for now?
Um, Honestly, it was the school. If things hadn't been so bad, I would have probably stayed at that. I mean, I don't know if I would have stayed at that school, but I would have figured out a way. And it was so bad for me that I just had to leave and remove myself from that situation. I'm like, nope, I can't stay here. I need to go. I need to go.
Okay. And so you came back to the United States. This
Yeah.
wasn't your first time back.
No.
So maybe and maybe this is more of a question like the first time you came back,
Right.
was there we hear people talk about like reverse culture shock.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
like what?
Um, I'd say though, well, the reverse culture shock would be going places and seeing just how much stuff we have. How many you go to a grocery store, and then I work at a grocery store, and people would complain, for example, about like there not being a particular type of almond, and I'm like, but there's 10 other kinds here, and so stuff like that would happen. And in Korea, there might be like two, or or they might not have that at all, and they'll have something totally different. So you just you get whatever it is. So it would be like seeing how many things we have here and how people don't really even bat an eye. Like the different tiers of toilet paper, from really cheap to really expensive, and I'm like, it's toilet paper. So that was a bit of a shock, and I think personal space is a big one, because here we're used to having a lot of space and not having people come up so close to you. But in Korea, you get bumped into, and that's something that people do. Even if you have space, there's going to be some point where someone will run into you, and you either move or you just you brush it off. Like, okay,
I do wonder if that's an East Asian thing in particular, because in
yeah,
China, personal space did not exist.
no, not at all. Like there'd be people like right, right by you, and then of course if you're on the subways, and there's sometimes you get packed in there, and you're definitely going to be with people like up close, and that's just how it is.
Okay, we did have a question here. Like, what was it like navigating transit while you were there?
Oh, it was. I mean, their transit system is phenomenal. It really is. Especially if you're talking about getting around in like the bigger cities. You have so many options. You don't even have to drive. Um, but you've got the trains. You have like the local trains. You have trying to think. You have an express train. That I lived on a line when one of the cities I lived in, I actually did live in Incheon. So that was the second place I lived in after I lived in my small fish town. And I spent most of my time in Incheon, and I love Incheon. And what I liked about it, the area I was is an area called Unsa, which is basically close to the airport. So I was like, yes, it is on a train line, perfect. So I would get on this train called the AREX. That's AREX, and that train would take you all the way from the airport all the way into like Seoul Station. So
Oh,
it
wow.
was easy. And then of course they had like the long distance trains. Korea, it's like Korea Rail or Korel. It's like KORAIL something, but that's like the long distance trains, and those are really nice. I mean, they're really fast. I lived in Daegu, so that was the city, that was the last public school. And Daegu is like way over on the other side of the country. Like, Incheon's up here, and then Daegu was like southeast. Yeah, Daegu was southeast, and so I was going northwest pretty much. And so I would take a train, and it would take me like 2.5 hours from Daegu to get up to Seoul, and it was fast. It went by really quickly. It's very affordable. Of course, they have all kinds of buses, especially in the cities. Like if you're in Incheon or if you're in Seoul or if you're in Busan, they've got a lot of buses. Even in my small little fish town, I was able to get a bus from my little town to the next little town, which was like kind of the hub for catching an express bus that would take you up to Seoul. Or else you could go to on the next big city and then catch the train or take a bus from there. So you had a lot of options to get places.
Which is so unlike the
Yeah,
US.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, and affordable. Like people are like, what?
yeah. Okay. So, did you pick up any Korean while you were there?
I mean, I'm not fluent, but I could have like a little conversation with people. We basically ask people how much things were, say hello. Um, my first teacher, not teacher, my first principal really appreciated how formal I was with him, because they have a whole hierarchy. The principals, like ding ding ding. So I would say, good morning to him. I would say 안녕 하십니까, and doing the whole bow thing, and that's like, a little bit of Korean, they'll just think you're the best thing ever. And folks would tell me that, oh, you're Korean now, Korean. I'm like, calm down.
And did you pick that up just through everyday life, or did you were you intentional about it and took lessons and studied?
I did both. I mean, I
Okay.
just by listening to people and talking to people, but I also I studied some Korean online, and I also actually met with a tutor, and she's Korean, but she actually had lived in South Africa, and she came back, and so we would get together, and I had my little Korean book. It's actually easy, really easy to learn the Korean alphabet. Super easy.
Hmm,
You can do that in like a day. I mean, I can
really?
read it. Sometimes I don't understand it, and other times I'm like, oh, banana, because they have a thing in Korea called Konglish. So basically, there's a lot of Korean words and English words that are kind of like together, and you're like, oh, okay, this is actually a little bit English. But
Okay.
yeah, it's a
All right.
beautiful language.
Okay. What about like shopping? Um, I feel like in Korea, it would be easier to find imported products from the US, but then on the other hand, I'm thinking on the whole, like Koreans don't want fruity pebbles. So it might be like $15 a box if you do find them.
Yeah. You can find that stuff, but some of it's, I mean, especially if you're talking about something like Fruity Pebbles, that might be something that's a little bit more challenging. But I have a friend who like knows people who live on the base, so if you have that kind of
No.
connection, you can get stuff
Then
that,
that's yeah, then
you know what I mean?
that's easy. I forgot about that.
Yeah, so that's easy. And also too, I mean, I ordered stuff through iHerb. I would get things from them. And I mean, they do have lots of different types of cereals, or they have their version of it. Or you're like, oh, this totally is like Rice Krispies. Like, So you can find that stuff, especially if you go to like there's a lot of they're kind of department store slash grocery stores. A place called Home Plus was one of the big places that you grocery shop or you buy your clothes at. And there's another one, Emarts. So those are
Mhm.
two of the bigger like chains. There's another one too, which is more. I think it's a British one, but I can't think of the name off.
Carrefour?
No,
Okay, maybe those are more in the Middle East.
but there are
You mentioned
places. Yeah.
shopping for clothes. How was that?
That's a little bit more challenging, especially if you're a larger person like myself. Um, so, I mean, one of the things they recommend is on your checklist is it, like they're like, look, if you're bigger and you got a big size chest, bring as many bras as you can. If you have large feet, get your footwear situated. I will say that they have more choices now, or at least they did back in 2020 or 2019 than they did when I got there in 2010. I brought quite a few clothes with me just because I read that and I was like, oh, yeah, I want to have my clothes and be official. And I dressed really professional back then. And but yeah, you can find those things. You can order stuff online. It's easy to get things sent to you. Either through Korean sites, Shin,
Mhm.
Shien, or just other sites around the world. Like it's easy to
I
get.
am
The mail service is really good there.
yeah, unlike some of the places I have getting mail in Korea is an actual thing. Um,
Hmm.
I like this question. Can you feel the US influence in South Korea?
Oh yeah, most definitely. Yeah, you feel it in a lot of things. You feel it in like I don't know, like music. I mean, they love American music. Especially if you're talking about like R&B, hip hop, rap. A lot of the K-pop. People. If you listen to K-pop, I mean, a lot of them are influenced. Like you listen to BTS, who their biggest influences are, and they list all these rap artists from the U.S. So there's a lot of influence that way, clothing wise. I would say so too. When it comes to maybe like streetwear, people are really into that. Um, yeah, I don't know what else to really say about that, but yeah, you can feel the Western influence that way through music and
How
culture.
how widely spoken was English?
Oh, a lot more so in Korea than when I took a trip to Japan, when I went to Tokyo. In Korea, they have signs everywhere, and their signs will be like in Korean, and then they'll have it in English, and then they'll have it in Chinese, they'll have it in Japanese and Chinese. And in some places, they actually now I saw Spanish, and I was like,
Oh,
oh,
wow.
oh okay, Russian. So they're much more. They really want. They recognize that a lot of people are coming from all over other places to hang out in Korea, and so they want to make sure that there's lots of signage everywhere. People can find where they are, especially in the bigger cities. Like in smaller areas, of course, there'll be people that don't speak English. And also to the generational thing. Like it's easier to find younger people that speak English than older people that speak English.
I spent a weekend in Seoul, and I don't remember feeling the way because when I lived in China for a year and a half, and I was functionally illiterate. I could not read any sign,
Yeah,
like, I hadn't given that thought before I moved there of, like, what that means to live in a place
yeah,
where you can't read anything that is written,
yeah,
and I don't recall that experience in Seoul, so, yeah, when you the signs in multiple languages, and
yeah,
that also, to me, speaks a little bit different to the Korean outlook on things,
yeah,
whereas in China, like, because we're not supposed to use Google, so they have their own Baidu Maps, but everything's in Mandarin. There is no click here to put it in English.
mm,
On all of the ordering apps, there is no English. Outside
mm.
of doing translations in WeChat, China's attitude was basically, we don't care if you're here. We speak Mandarin. Like, we don't care about you. So That's that I think speaks a lot to kind of some of the cultural differences between those 2 groups, that in Korea, there would be and their relationships with the outside world, that signs would be in multiple languages. Um, I find that very interesting, very
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, you can
Um,
translate things so easily. They have like a lot of forums that you could just put it in there in Korean. Like, okay,
okay, do you wanna answer a question about dating?
about dating. Okay, I'll try
Mhm.
my best.
Okay. What was the dating scene like?
um, what was the dating scene like? Well, I will say too that I'm a part of the I am a part of the queer community. Um, so coming from that perspective, but then what I saw with my friends, um, I would say, well, what was it like? I mean, if you go to clubs, that was one of the things that people did. You go out and you mingle and go dancing, and that was like one of the ways to meet people. Um, I don't know if you're interested in dating Koreans or if you're interested in meeting other like expats. Um, that's like something that could be useful to know. Um, I know that there are a lot of folks that end up when they would go, they would end up meeting other expats, or they would end up meeting. They would end up meeting in Korean, and they would maybe meet through like a language exchange, which was a big way to meet people for dating, um, or doing activities aside from going out clubbing and dancing. Like, maybe like they have a lot of events, a lot of festivals there, which I think they probably have a lot of those in China and Japan as well. But there's always some kind of festival happening. So groups of us would go together, but that would be another way to kind of have like a date, but like in a group situation. I don't, yeah, I don't know if I
Well,
answered.
I think you did,
Okay.
but I'm now curious, because, I know
Mm,
we often hear that,
yeah.
um, Asia is a little less liberated when it comes to queer people
Yeah.
than countries in the West, and
Mhm.
was that your experience in South Korea?
Yeah. I mean, it was in the beginning, but I will say that it changed throughout the time that I was there. Like the first year that I was there, I did go to the Pride. They did have a Pride festival, and they do have one.
Okay.
Um, and I went, and actually, even like who was involved with it, it was nice to see the evolution because in the beginning, it seemed like it was mostly expats and foreigners who were kind of in charge of putting this together. And then by the time I left, it was definitely a Korean event, and Korean LGBTQ plus folks were running the show. And I liked seeing that, and I went there to support them because I was like, it's important that we all are there to show up in numbers and to support them and to, show up because it's really hard. They have like these various church groups that would like picket outside of City Hall. But the police were there and they kept those people out of the event. So people could go about their business and march and participate in the festivals that were happening. When I went there, there was all kinds of different booths. The United States was represented. Let's say I'm trying to think all the different embassies were there as representatives. Like, yeah, we support you, and you're here, and that's great. And here's some information if you need anything. Um, but I mean, there's still a bit of folks being closeted because they have to because of the culture. But it also too it is changing because you've got that, but then you have this young group of people that have grown up and they've like watched RuPaul, and they can talk to you about RuPaul and the Drag Race and kimchi and like, do you know kimchi? I'm like, of course I know kimchi. Like, not personally, but I know who you're talking about. And but it was neat to see that how it went from a really small group of people to like a really large festival, and it would get coverage and there'd be pictures. And so yeah, it changed a lot. I mean, it's still, it's still a conservative culture, but but they are changing slowly. I mean, in my
Okay.
opinion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Couple people have asked this if there's any thought to moving out of the US permanently for you.
Oh yeah, most definitely. I'm just trying to figure out how to do that. Like I told myself, I was talking to another friend who's another woman of color, and she's from Mexico. Um, but we were talking about it, and she gave herself. She has like a countdown on her phone. I'm like, I should do that. Like, put a countdown, a timer on your phone. But like 2024 is kind of what I was thinking. But then maybe 2025. I don't know. I don't want to wait too long, but I'm at this job, and part of me is like, okay, but you know, there's opportunities. Keep yourself open, and if something
Okay.
presents itself, go for it. I mean, you only have this life, and I want to live my life. I mean, I'm not young, and I'm not. I mean, when I went to Korea, I was one of the older people that went there in my group. And at the time, I looked much younger than I do now. I had like shaved head, and I was a lot thinner. I mean, I put on some pounds. But
Oh,
people,
haven't we all?
my co-teachers are like, "Oh, what? You're not this old." I'm like, "Yes, I am." But thank you. So, but yeah, I do think about actually, moving abroad. I'm just trying to figure out where I would want that to be. You know,
Okay. And what's on your list? What are your must-haves?
my must-haves. Sorry, it's like really hot. It was like almost 100 today.
Oh my god.
Must-haves. In place that I go to, wherever I move.
Yeah, like
Um,
what's on your country shopping list? What are you looking for in a country?
uh, some place that's beautiful. A place where I can go. Well, I'm a biker. I like to bike. I like to go on hikes. Um, I like to. I'm a person who likes to go to museums. I like any kind of theater, any of that kind of stuff. So those things are like really big on my list. Having good internet connection is important. It definitely saved me when I was in Korea because I could like talk to my mom, talk to my friends back here, and so keep that connection. So strong internet is really important. I would say like community too, having a good supportive expat community, and you'll find that if you go to Korea, there's a huge community of expats, it's particularly Black folks, Black women and Black men who are living it. They're doing it. They're teaching, or they're living their best lives. And there are folks that are even not teaching, and they have businesses, and they're doing it.
I oh gosh, it might have been 2 years ago. I did a two-part video on the best countries for Black women expats, and a young lady I spoke to who lived in Korea,
Mhm.
that's how she was like, everybody else was coming to teach. I came in on a business visa,
Yep.
and she was like, "That's
Mhm.
like the hack that nobody knows about."
Yeah, it is. Well, particularly too, because I'm not particularly, but Incheon, or not Incheon, Itaewon, which is like the big foreign area. I mean, there's many, but that's like the biggest one. Like you go there, and like if you're craving Western food, you can find pretty much any Western restaurant there. That's where you go for clothes shopping, books, etc. But there's a row of businesses where they cater towards Black folks. And like I went and I got my hair braided by a woman who was, I think she was from Nigeria. And then there was a couple guys along the way. They had their small little grocery stores that sold foods that were from Kenya or wherever. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that happening, and I'm like, wow, there are other people doing different things besides teaching. That's really cool to see. So
Mhm. All right. Well, thank you so much for being willing to share your experience. Um, I don't often get a chance to talk to people who have lived in Asia, uh, and who've lived in Asia and had a good experience. So that was refreshing to hear.
mostly good
So
experience, mostly good.
yeah, yeah. So thank you for volunteering to share that with the audience.
My pleasure.
Um, Glad you could do it. I'm trying to think. What are the things I'm supposed to tell y'all? If you have not subscribed to the channel, you should subscribe. Like the video, all that good stuff. Um, if you are interested in participating in our no spend or low spend challenge that starts August 16th, you can sign up. There is a link below in the description of this video. There is also a link to the other video I did where I discussed the program that Donna participated in, EPIK, where basically the Korean government helps you move there so that you can teach English, and
Mm,
some other programs. So if you are sitting in the US and you're like, I need to go and I ain't got time to build up a whole lot of money. There are ways for you to get out. It might not have been the trajectory or the path that you thought you were going to take, but it can get you out and then give you the space and the time to formulate your next move. Okay? So, I guess I'll see y'all live next week. Uh, Actually, there will be another podcast episode on Friday, as soon as I finish editing that. And I will talk to y'all then. Bye, guys.